All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we are going to be talking about the second book of The Wheel of Time, The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. I should say this at the beginning that there will be spoilers for this book throughout this review. I usually tend to only have my first reviews be a little bit more spoiler free because I figure by that point you're a little bit more committed to the series. But for those of you still wondering, should I bother reading this series or not? I would say yes. There are some stipulations about that. The Wheel of Time is a very it's very much a time commitment of a series. There are 14 books in it, 15 if you count the prequel book. Um, and they're not something you can just sit down and read in a day for the average person, and I get that. Um, so understand that it is going to take some time to get through, but I do believe that the payoffs at the end of the series are definitely worth the read. So, with that being said, let's get started with my positives of this series. So, first off, I think that Jordan does a significantly better job with Perrin, Rand, and Matt in this book versus the first book. I think that they have a lot more depth and intricacies to their characters. Um, and they start to get flushed out a little bit in this book, and I do enjoy that, and that continues on, which I love to see. And I think that's because Jordan's kind of finding his footing at this point in this book. I feel like with the first book, there's a lot to keep track of when you're writing a novel. And I think in the first book, he was just like, getting his footing down. And I think this book does a good job of starting to set that a little bit more and him find his writing style and fix some of these problems that he had in the first book. Now, I also really enjoyed seeing Kyrian and getting to see more places of the world and have him flesh out his world building more. And I think that's one of Jordan's like strongest skills as a writer is this intricate world building. There's so many things that he just is able to describe and give us information on. I also really enjoyed seeing the Amerlin Seat. I thought that was another good set of scenes that gives us a bit more depth into the Aes Sedai, who have been this mysterious force up to this point. And I mean, they still have that mysterious air to them, but they're a bit more grounded, and it's interesting to see that. But my favorite moments in the book, I have two that really stood out to me. But I would say my number one moment is the setups and payoffs with the portal stones. So initially, I definitely remember on my first read through, I was a little like, why are we setting up another way to travel? We already have set up the ways. Why do we need to set up a second way? And while I still have that feeling a little bit, I do really enjoy the addition of the portal stones to the world. And I like how the first set of scenes with Rand and Huron and Loyal traveling through one by accident really shows that there can be some dangers and benefits to them where you can actually shift into entirely different worlds where other things have happened, but you can also potentially save time getting to the locations that you need to get to. And I think that setup was great tied in with the payoff at the end when they're desperate and they need to catch up and get the dagger so Matt doesn't die. And Rand shifts them through a portal stone, but he messes up. And instead it shifts them through like thousands of worlds. And to them, it's very quick. But they end up losing time because of that. Luckily, like, they get the benefit of they don't experience that time, so Matt's still okay, but they end up like being further behind than they would have if they would have just traveled normally. But I think in addition to that, my favorite part is getting to see those little snippets of other lives that Rand could have had if, destiny was woven in a different way. And I know in the audiobook especially, it really gives me like chills when I hear the narrator read the line, "I win again, Lews Therin." I love that part. and getting to hear all of those elements is very exciting. And also, I think that one thing I love in addition to that is the benefit of we only get to see Rand's point of view in that specific instance, so we only get to see his journeys through the other worlds, and we don't get to see everyone because that'd be really boring, but we get to see enough to get a groundwork and understand how this has kind of affected him, and we get to see that in the other characters as well, especially with Matt and Perrin and even Inktar later on, which we'll get to my second moment. But I think that is super cool, and I really, really enjoyed that. My second favorite moment is this is a huge spoiler, but is the realization of Inktar being a dark friend. Now, this is my third read through of the series, so I kind of already knew that was coming. It still hits home in that moment when he reveals that, and I think it's such a good inclusion in this book, because in the first book, a lot of the dark friends, I mean, we had Pod and Fane, who was like a named character, but a lot of them were just like random villagers that we didn't really get to know at all. And even with Pod and Fane, he wasn't really like an ally at any point. Whereas with Inktar, we get the element of revealing that, hey, this guy is your friend, but he's also a servant of the Dark One. And so there's like this blurring and graying of lines that I really like. But I think, which is something I don't think I felt as much in the first one, and I think that the moment where he turns to save Rand and Matt and Perrin and kind of turn back to the light a little bit, and Rand gives him the funeral rites, I think that moment has so much emotional weight to it, which I personally really enjoyed. I felt like that was really missing from the first one. There wasn't as much. It was kind of a traditional quest story where we go from point A to point B to point C, you know. There were still good parts about it, but that moment gave some, you know, emotional context to that piece. And I think that on the other side of thing with the girls during that time, I think Egwene's refusal to be collared again also kind of adds a little bit more depth there that I really enjoyed. Now let's go to some cons. So for the first couple books, Jordan has a very similar plot line, is I guess the best way to put it. It's very much the like going on a journey, going from point A to point B to point C. This one had better emotional moments in it. I think he took more time and less time on traveling and more time on scenes that I think we care about more, which was exciting. But I am excited for the mix-up that I know is coming. So that's one of my like, okay, we need something different a little bit. But that one's like very minor. My bigger concern in this book is I really hate the way in which Nynaeve and Egwene and Elaine and Min are shuffled to the conclusion of the book. I'm happy to get to see the Shan-Chan. I'm not happy how we got there. I feel like the way in which the dialogue works with Elida and the girls, and even Nynaeve kind of points it out as like this, like she already doesn't trust Aes Sedai. And it seems very, you know, weird that they end up trusting Elida, who they barely know, with this traveling through the ways. So I felt like it was a very flimsy, it very much felt like I need to get these characters here, and I can't from where they're at without some convoluted method. So I didn't really like that. I don't. I know some people are like, well, but this, fills in that. It doesn't matter if there's like, if you can fill in the plot hole with logical reasons. It isn't a good moment of writing, I think it is an element in which Jordan suffers from in this book, and there can be reasons for that, right? Like, obviously, I've had brought up to me, I think in the Drink and Discuss on this book with friends, was like, well, Aes Sedai can't lie, so they believe her because of that. But there's also, you've got to understand, like, that doesn't make sense for Nynaeve as a character right there, right? Like, she already does not trust Aes Sedai. Even if they don't lie, she knows that the words that they use aren't always the words that you're hearing. So, yes, there can be logical reasons for it. It still is, I would consider, one of the weakest parts of this book specifically. And I go back and think, like, especially during this time when these books were being published, Jordan was on a time crunch for a lot of these books. So I give him some leeway for that, for sure. Like, he's pushing out a book one of these books like every year, I believe. That's a lot of writing to do in a very short amount of time. Whereas nowadays, a lot of writers, I think, have a little bit wider of a deadline. I think to Stormlight, which I would say is the closest comparison I can make to the Wheel of Time, and Sanderson has about, I believe, 3 years between each book. So he has more time to go back and do these revisions and stuff, whereas Jordan, I felt like, was a bit rushed. And I think that's one of the things that happens quite a bit throughout the series, is I can understand why certain things are the way they are, from like, like, I get why they're this way, but I think that especially some of these earlier books could have really benefited from like another round of revision, or 2 more rounds of revision, where we go through and we tighten up these moments, we make them a little bit more impactful. Wishing for that does not change the books, so we have to understand that these are published and these are what we have to work with. Writing Gent rant over. I don't know if that's really a rant, but that's just the way I see this and see things around this. Overall, I do think The Great Hunt is better than The Eye of the World. And I think people will see that as I continue to review these in smaller chunks. We also have our Drink and Discusses that are a bit more, if you want more in-depth discussions, you can go look at those. Where I take some of my friends and we sit down and we really break down each part of the book. They're a lot longer, but we go into way more detail. And there are disagreements even between, us. And that's what I want to show, that not every opinion, like my opinion is not, the only opinion, the only point of authoritativeness that exists in the world. I'm just one person talking about this book. I have experience with writing, but that doesn't mean that I'm like, there are other, opinions that you can listen to and other reviews and stuff. And you can agree and disagree and still appreciate what one person sees in the book, even if you don't see the same thing. I think that's going to be it for this one. There's not a whole lot more I really want to talk about. I think those are the big things that happen in the book that I really enjoy. Getting to see Lanfear is cool. Really enjoyed that. But most of the big moments for me are those two, the Portal Stones and the Inktar moment. Those are the two that I'm just like, those ones really stick with me as I move through the series. And those are the moments I like to think about. So I think that'll be it. And I appreciate you guys for watching. Be sure to, like, subscribe if you'd like to. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.